Hey there sexy vault dwellers, Stormy Skies 369 here with a video that's a little different. A very talented dweller by the name of Keirwen has kindly let me share some Fallout stories with you. So sit back, chill out and let's have some story time with Stormy. Pre-Reclamation Day, Harper's Ferry, before the Great War, Calvin's Descent. Calvin Richards, known to his friends as Cal and formerly known to some as Staff Sergeant Richards, stared at the blank computer monitor before him, deeply fatigued. A veteran of the Sino-American War, he had witnessed so many atrocities in his tours of duty. War always brings with it desperation and horror, all in the name of survival. The death tolls, to both military and civilian alike, have been steep and terrifying. He had witnessed his companions in arms perish for a myriad of reasons. Gunshot wounds, laser burns, concussive force, ruptured vital organs, and many other various forms of combat-related dismemberment or death, all the way to severe frostbite and hypothermia. Such was the reality of battle in the Alaskan frontier. His distressing dreams were the result of those experiences, often awakening in the dead of night covered in a sheen of sweat and panting for breath, reliving the demise of his squad. The dream, or perhaps his memories, are still vividly alive in his mind. The sharp retorts of ballistic weapons firing from somewhere overhead, soft muted cries of pain as two of his men slumped to the ground. Fredericks had been hit multiple times. It was his moans and cries of surprised pain that echoed in Richard's headset. Thompson was dead, half of his head destroyed by a large caliber bullet that tore through his left eye. "Take cover," he screamed, to be heard over the clatter of the automatic fire. At that moment, he was sure he heard the sound of several bodies leaping behind fallen trees, rocks, and even deep snowdrifts, if no other cover was close. The slightly packed snow offered little in the way of cover, but it did offer protection from concealment. All his men were there, pleading with him, accusing him of not doing everything he could to save them. In his waking hours, at least when he wasn't drunk, he recognised that this could not be so. His ears rang at the time with gunfire, screams, and even the explosions of handheld grenades damaged his hearing. With chaos all around him, there was no way he could track the men he had remaining. In the 2 years since he had left the service and brought his young family here to West Virginia, he could only remember actually seeing Frederick and Thompson fall. He knew what it was, survivor's guilt. Hypervigilance in his mind, filling the blank spaces of a broken memory. Like hearing the voices of his long-dead friends, it was yet another symptom of his fractured psyche seeking to repair the trauma he had endured. He was guided to record a journal as part of his debriefing, and as always his mind was vacant and distant when he sat and put his thoughts to the recordable device. He wondered if it would be easier to write on paper. The computer screen always reminded him of the snow of a faraway Alaska. "This is a waste of fucking time," he grumbled as he reached for the whiskey bottle on his desk. He poured himself a knuckle of the amber fluid, then quickly drowned it. He poured himself another shot, and after a few minutes of contemplation, added another. His despondent gaze again returned to the faintly flickering monitor. He sighed heavily and stood, picking up his tumbler as he made his way to the metal staircase heading up to the surface. As he reached the solid metal hatchway designed by his wife's distant cousin, the leader of a group calling themselves the Free States, he turned to gaze at the cosy emergency bunker turned literal man cave. The world had gone mad. Meagre supplies had been reaching the highly dense population centres. People have been starving. Desperation, anger and resentment driving protests into riots. Military units had been called into many of the larger populated areas to maintain order, or what used to be called martial law. He bought this property fairly cheap, redesigning the concrete monstrosity upon taking ownership, 15 feet of dense soil and another 15 feet of reinforced steel, and then poured concrete. It gave him a measure of security against some of the worst natural disasters. The thought of being down here for any length of time with those blast doors closed gave him the damn creeps. Alison, his wife, had brought into her cousin's theories of impending doom. She wanted to protect her daughter and her loved ones. Granted, the future did indeed look bleak, and the near past was absolutely a shitty experience. She insisted on having the bunker retrofitted and stocked with supplies if they could not reside with her cousin. Calvin thought it best to distance themselves from those kooks, so he reluctantly gave in to her requests. Alison was an avid gardener and learned long ago how to preserve and can her bounties, so there were shelves packed with various produce grown locally. Keirwen himself was a decent hunter at one time. Since his tours of service, he had not picked up any of the rifles that most likely collected dust in the safe. It just didn't seem right to him to use such a device. Perhaps the scars ran too deep. He did find that he enjoyed using a bow for hunting the many deer that roamed in the thickly forested mountains. Smoked venison and venison jerky supplemented the staples. Cal shook his head as he dampened the lights and went up the stairs. Their entire life savings went into this mess, and he would be working well past retirement, but at least his family was happy, which was more than he could say about himself. Besides, it was a nice environment in the cave, like on those occasions he felt he needed solitude. The cool autumn night was crisp as he stepped into the open air. He paused a moment, breathing deeply of the calm night before taking a sip and entering the home. The house was bright. Alison had used small reflective surfaces to increase the available light sources. Power was becoming spotty lately. Tightening resources and more power being drained to the larger cities were taking its toll on the small communities. Thankfully, those communities were used to being self-sufficient. If the power goes off at night, no problem. Go to bed and don't open the fridge. They still had another hour of daylight though. As tired as he was, he wanted desperately to enjoy a bit of time with his joy. Sophia was a blessing. He and Alison conceived a little blonde bundle of joy nearly 5 years ago during a brief moment of respite. He was given a leave of absence to go home after serving 24 consecutive months in the mostly frigid north. It had been hard before, but after discovering their twice-begotten child, Cal became more terrified of the many dangers of the war. Sophia was a year old when the ambush occurred that scarred Cal's mind with nightmares. It was she that gave him strength not to throw himself into battles with reckless abandonment, to just end it. She who gave him the courage to stand firm and try to make it home. After the squad died, and he turned to the bottle of solace, it was Alison and Sophia that kept him from drowning himself in liquor. He wanted to be a good father and provider. He smiled as he entered the small kitchen. Alison was preparing food, some kind of thin soup. He could smell the cabbage and other vegetables from the small winter garden within. He realised he was hungry as he had not eaten that day. He finished off his glass and set it soundlessly in the old porcelain sink. Alison glanced at the glass with silent apprehension. She worried for the strong, silent man she married nearly a decade earlier, the very same man who cried in his sleep. When he drank, he became even more morose. She smiled gently as he turned his attention to their daughter. Sophia was sitting at the table, colouring in one of her many colouring books. Cal noted that some of the crayons were becoming little more than nubs. He would have to make his way over to White Springs soon. Perhaps they had some more crayons in stock. There was also a new board game that was released a few months ago, a themed version of Catch the Commie, using the comic book heroes from Unstoppables. Though Sophia was not a strong reader yet, she loved the depictions of the heroes. She loved it when he played the characters for her. Perhaps it were helping encouraging her to read more. She did not look up as he advanced. His large hands ruffled the thick golden curls. He kissed the top of her head, eliciting a giggle from the young child. "Good evening, Pumpkin," he said as he looked over her shoulder at her progress. She was not colouring in her books, but drawing. He recognised the white and blue stars with blue circles, the Free States iconography, the bisected blue and white star with the blue chain broke in the top left corner. He glanced to his wife, accusation apparent. "When did you see this, kiddo?" he asked mildly. "Mummy showed it to me," she replied happily. "Do you like it?" Keirwen brought his attention back to her, taking in the open innocent blue eyes and happy expression of his child. His heart swelled with barely suppressed emotion, just as it froze in cold dread. The Free States was attracting a lot of attention lately, and he didn't want his family involved in any of their affairs. He saw their emblem brazenly exposed in many of the local areas, in open defiance to the government lockdowns and guidelines. He knew all too well what the government was capable of. He sighed heavily again. "Oh, Daddy, you stink," Sophie claimed unexpectedly. Alison quickly responded. "That is the chemicals your daddy works with, dear, and it's not polite to say such things." Sophia appeared slightly rebuffed. "I'm sorry, Daddy, I didn't mean it, honestly," she said in a small voice. Keirwen looked at his daughter with heartbreak. He had unconsciously taken a step away from her, hoping the distance would not allow the smell of alcohol and his breath to reach her. "No, little one, it's okay, I do stink. You should never fear telling the truth, even if it does hurt." He gave her slim shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Now if you ladies will excuse me, I shall go shower." "Dinner will be ready soon," Alison said to him as he passed. Calvin nodded, gazed down. The need for the succour offered by the whisky warred with his desire to be strong for his beloved family. He desperately wanted to be a good father and husband. The impending dreams he knew would welcome him as he slept fed the siren's call of a drunken stupor. He sculled at his bedroom door. Just beyond that door was the closet in which he had another bottle of whisky, and possibly a night would pass without the memories, the blood and the screaming. He opened the door. His gaze burned in the direction of the closed closet door. He clenched his eyes closed and summoned the vision of Sophia and Alison, a deep breath, long and ragged. He shuddered as he released it. He opened his drawer and with shaking hands withdrew a clean set of pyjamas and undershorts. Without a backwards glance he made his way towards the shower. 15 minutes later he returned to his family at the table and took his seat. Alison placed a bowl of hot soup before him and took her own seat. He gave her a wan but truly heartfelt smile. "Thank you, Ellie," he said as he picked up his napkin and spoon, placing the former over his lap before beginning to eat. She returned his smile. "You're welcome, Cal." She turned to Sophia and said gently, "Sophia dear, it's time for you to eat. Put your art aside, please." The blonde curls bobbed a bit as the little girl nodded her understanding. "Okay, Mum." She gathered the papers, the colouring books and the dwindling crayons into a small basket. Setting it all aside, she eyed the soup suspiciously. Alison noticed. "Young lady, I know you don't like cabbage, but it's more than so many have. Eat." Sophia's brow furrowed in disgust, and dutifully she began to spoon the thin soup into her mouth. Vegetable soup, not her favourite, she preferred beef. Alas, it was rare as the prohibitive cost and demand was becoming too much for her parents to afford. The few chickens kept in the backyard beside the garden were slowly downing their laying. She heard her mother speak of slaughtering one of the chickens to supplement their diet. Sophia found her appetite was sharpened by the thought of fresh chicken. It cheered her up immensely. She ate with more gusto, reaching across the table for some of the baked bread from yesterday morning. "Do we have butter?" she asked innocently. Alison looked up from her bowl. She was tearing a chunk of the hardening bread into small pieces and adding it to the soup. "No, we don't have any more butter. We will get some Monday when we can from our collect at the allotment." Calvin bit the inside of his lip. "Why don't we just buy some? The work at the mine has been steady this week," he asked quietly. "We have met our assigned quota." "Yes, dear, there just isn't any available at the moment. Supplies are behind. Jane says she would have some Thursday, but we can get some Monday when the community relief truck comes through. I have vouchers." Calvin began to feel sick. Government handouts always have a hidden cost. It rankled him to share a belief with those traitors in the Free States. He just couldn't return to the naive trust that the government always had their best interest in mind. He felt ashamed of the anger that came so quickly to him and lowered his gaze back to the bowl before him. He considered the food stores that Alison had been squirreling away below their feet. They were not starving, he just couldn't understand her drive to hold back on breaking into what she called her stores. Her responses were always the same. Hard times were coming. Calvin stifled a bitter laugh as he recalled her arguments. Times were hard now. How much more difficult could they get? His mind flashed to a point in the not-so-distant past, and he visibly blanched. No, he was not going there. He was safe here, away from the wars that still raged. As dangerous as it was deep within the earth of Keirwen mine, it was trivial in comparison. Safe. His breath caught. He felt the panic escalating within, heart beginning to pound, his vision fading. He stood abruptly, absently knocking over his nearly empty bowl. As he slowly brought his breathing back into control, he became aware of his wife and daughter staring at him, bright innocent blue eyes wide with apprehension, and another set of older, wiser eyes of the same colour, watching him with sadness. I'm sorry," he blurted before quickly departing. He made for his bedroom, blinking back the frustrated tears. There was no hesitation. He made his way directly to the closet door and withdrew the half-full bottle of whisky and took a deep draw. Swallowing the bitter amber liquid, hardly noticing the echo of burning it left in his throat, as it settled into his stomach he waited for the warmth to spread, waiting for the release. It only took a few minutes. The strong alcohol began to take its toll. The disorientation as his head swam and the memories rescinded. He took another drink. He hoped that the unconscious would take him soon, and he could finally relax in the absolute of nothingness. The bottle was now nearing empty. A vague impression of having to replenish a life-sustaining drink invaded his fading thoughts. Tomorrow. I will talk to him tomorrow. Darkness overcame him, and Keirwen slept deeply. The tiny metallic tone was insistent, perpetuating the pulsing headache that Keirwen had rapidly become aware of. His arm came up to rest over his head and eyes. The pre-dawn light was entirely too bright in the room. "Hello?" he heard Addison ask on the phone sleepily. The other voice was too quiet for him to hear clearly, but he felt his wife sit up in bed. "Yes, Sam, I can wake him. Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice rising in alarm. A short murmured response. "Yeah, hold on a moment." Her small hand shook his shoulder, insisting and urgent. "Keirwen, it's Sam. He says it's urgent." Keirwen groaned. He had not intended to get so drunk last night. He was going to pay a heftier price for it as the day went on. He was not looking forward to it. He tried vainly to push her hands away. The shaking was making him nauseated as well as painful. She continued her relentless attempts to awake him. "Keirwen, wake up. Sam is on the phone. He needs to speak to you." "Call back later," he called out gruffly as he turned away from her, more murmuring conversation. "Oh my God, are you sure?" Addison became rigid, shock and fear radiating from her frame. She listened intently a moment, and then began a more violent push at her husband. "Keirwen, wake up!" Her voice had a sharpness to it that pushed through the misery that he was experiencing. He turned to look at her, noticing the alarm in her pale face and the wide eyes full of fear. He stamped down the apprehension and rising anger. He took the phone's handset and held it away from his ear. "Yes, Sam, this better be damn important," he muttered as he tried to take his wife's hand to comfort her. "Keirwen, they did it." The voice at the other side of the line was deep, resonating strength and control usually. Today it sounded hollow. Keirwen's former commanding officer was always in control of himself, regardless of any chaos around him. "Who did what, Sam?" His head hurt too much to try to figure out any riddles at the moment. "The Chinese have sent the nuclear missiles our way. We have issued orders to retaliate. The war has just gotten worse. Listen, I need to make a few more phone calls. Get to that bunker you spoke of. I'm sorry, I need to go." The call disconnected, and Keirwen's cloudy mind tried to put everything it just received into place. Nuclear, bunker, retaliate. "Keirwen," Addison asked quietly, "Sam said that we are going to be under attack. What did he tell you?" Her hand gripped his, knuckles white. "The communists have decided to go with the nuclear option." Keirwen glanced at her, realization settling in. "We have to get to the shelter, now." Addison leaped up and ran towards her daughter's bedroom, not even taking time to dress. Keirwen, on the other hand, hurriedly dressed himself, pulling on his jeans and boots. He stumbled towards the back door and ran into the yard. The half-dozen chickens were waiting for him at the door of their enclosure, waiting for the door to open. With dawn breaking, they would soon be able to forage in the yard when the humans opened the coop. Today would be a slight variation. Keirwen opened the door and grabbed the first of the birds to walk through by the neck. He quickly wrenched, severing the spinal column and killing the creature. He tossed the carcass in a bucket nearby that contained the chicken feed and reached for another. Sophia was stunned by the sudden appearance of her mother, and her fluster stayed as she burst into the bedroom. Addison grabbed clothing, piling them upon the bed. "Sophia, hun, wake up. I need you to get dressed," she said quickly, not pausing in her rushed agenda. Sophia did not respond immediately. She sat up in bed, watching with growing concern as her mother piled more and more onto the bed, or on top of her, clothes, toys, games. Her mother was doing exactly what she was told to do. She was confused and scared. "Sophie, move!" Her mother cried at her sharply. Sophia slipped out of her bed and began to do as her mother commanded. The Richards family had retrieved all the food, clothing and other items they thought they might need, and found themselves in their concrete abode within an hour. Keirwen brought down the slain chickens and all the fed produce they still resided within the cold, wilted gardens. The winter crops harvested prematurely, and all the root crops pulled from the loose soil. Addison was grateful that she was home today. She wondered if she would have been able to function without his resolve. Addison brought all the clothing and perishables from the house down through the cellar entrance to the bunker deep under the homestead. She made several trips. Every time she passed a window, her eyes sought the overcast sky, wondering if she would see the destruction streaking over their home. The radio began blaring warnings. Only 30 minutes after Sam's call, but it was enough. It gave them a head start. She hoped they had time. That's the end of part 1. Please give a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. Kel and his family have a really difficult time ahead of them, so don't forget to subscribe for the next part of their adventure. A massive thank you out to Keirwen for letting me share this story too. Please comment below or come say hi in the Discord. I've left a fresh link below. Catch you guys soon. Bye.